The air in the emergency room at Metropolitan General is a chemical soup. It's a mix of antiseptic, stale coffee, and the metallic tang of fear. For Nurse Alara Vance, it was the smell of anonymity. It was the smell of her quiet, carefully constructed cage. She moved through the chaos with a practiced slowness, her shoulders hunched, her eyes fixed on the scuffed linoleum floor. She was a ghost in blue scrubs, a necessary but forgettable part of the hospital's machinery. Her job was to be invisible, to complete her tasks without drawing attention, to simply survive the shift. Alara kept her hair pulled back in a tight, severe bun, but a few strands always seemed to escape, falling across her temple. She was constantly tucking them back, a nervous, bird-like gesture. It was a habit born not of vanity, but of concealment. Beneath those wisps of brown hair was a scar, a pale, thin line that puckered the skin just above her eyebrow. It was a relic from another life, a life she had buried under years of timid smiles and whispered apologies. In this world, she was just Alara, slow, clumsy Alara, the nurse they called Mouse. She was stocking a supply cart when it happened. Her hands, usually so deliberate in their slowness, fumbled a box of sterile saline bags. It tipped. The plastic containers cascaded downward, striking a tray of metal instruments balanced precariously on the cart's lower shelf. The result was a sudden, jarring cacophony, a crash of metal on tile that sliced through the ER's dull roar. Every head turned. Every conversation stopped. And in the sudden, ringing silence, Alara felt 100 pairs of eyes land on her. Her face burned with a familiar, hot shame. "For God's sake, Vance, can you do nothing right?" The voice was a scalpel, sharp and cold. Dr. Alistair Finch, chief of surgery, stood not 10 feet away. He was a man carved from ambition and arrogance, with a surgeon's precision in his movements and a bully's cruelty in his eyes. He was a god in this domain, and he did not suffer fools, incompetents, or clumsy nurses. To him, Alara was all three. He strode toward her, his expensive shoes clicking on the floor like a countdown. The other nurses and doctors, the sycophants, shrunk back, some hiding smirks. Chloe, a younger nurse who had always been kind to Alara, looked down at her own shoes, her jaw tight. Brenda, the senior charge nurse, simply turned her back and became intensely interested in a patient's chart across the room. No one ever stood up to Dr. Finch. "Look at this mess," Finch sneered, gesturing at the scattered supplies. He didn't shout. He didn't have to. His voice was a low, venomous thing that carried more weight than any scream. "This is a sterile environment, or it was, until you decided to redecorate with your signature incompetence." Alara's heart hammered against her ribs. "I'm sorry, doctor. It slipped." Her own voice was a whisper, barely audible. Finch let out a short, incredulous laugh. "It slipped. Of course it did. Everything slips with you, doesn't it, Vance? Trays, charts, patient care standards." He took another step, invading her personal space. He was tall, and he used his height to loom over her, a predator cornering its prey. "I have half a mind to write you up for endangering this entire department." "I'll clean it up immediately," she stammered, bending down to retrieve the fallen items. "Oh, you will," he said, his voice dropping even lower. He reached out and grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her flesh like talons. Alara flinched, a jolt of pure shock running through her. His grip was painfully tight. "You will get on your hands and knees, and you will pick up every single piece. And while you're down there, I want you to reflect on your utter uselessness to this hospital. Am I clear?" Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, hot and humiliating. She nodded, unable to speak. The grip on her arm was a brand, searing his contempt into her. He held her there for a moment longer, ensuring everyone in the ER was watching. He wanted an audience for his power play. He wanted her humiliation to be total. Finally, he released her with a dismissive shove. Alara stumbled, catching herself on the cart. She sank to her knees, her face a mask of shame. The world narrowed to the white floor and the scattered plastic bags. She could hear the snickers now, the whispers starting up again as the hospital's rhythm slowly resumed. She began to gather the supplies, her movements stiff and robotic. Each bag she picked up felt like a stone, heavy with the weight of her failure. This was her life now. This was the penance she paid for surviving the life that came before. She just had to endure it. The incident faded, as they always did, into the background noise of the shift. Alara finished cleaning her mess, restocked the cart, and retreated into the quietest corner of the ER she could find, tasked with organizing paperwork. It was a menial job, one usually given to aides, but it suited her. It was solitary. It was silent. It kept her out of Dr. Finch's line of sight. She focused on the crisp edges of the paper, the neat stacks, imposing a small, controllable order on her chaotic world. She tried to ignore the lingering ache in her arm where Finch had grabbed her. Bruises would form. They always did. He was a man who believed his authority was best expressed through physical intimidation, especially with those he deemed beneath him. She had seen him do it to others, but it was always worse when directed at her. She was his favorite target, the perfect outlet for his casual cruelty. He knew she would never fight back. She never did. Chloe found her there an hour later, a cup of lukewarm tea in her hand. "Here," she said softly, placing it on the corner of the desk. "I thought you might want this." Alara looked up, surprised. "Thank you, Chloe." The younger nurse hesitated, wringing her hands. "What he did, it wasn't right, Alara. He shouldn't be allowed to touch anyone like that." Alara offered a small, tired smile. "It's fine. I should have been more careful." It was the same thing she always said, the path of least resistance. "No, it's not fine," Chloe insisted, her voice a fierce whisper. "Someone should say something. Brenda should have stepped in." "Brenda has a mortgage," Alara said simply, "and Dr. Finch sits on the review board. It's just how things are." She looked back down at her papers, a clear dismissal. She appreciated the sentiment, but sympathy was a luxury she couldn't afford. It invited connection, and connection invited questions. She had worked too hard to become a blank page. Chloe lingered for another moment, her frustration and pity warring on her face. Finally, she sighed and walked away, leaving Alara alone with the silent stacks of paper and the cold cup of tea. Alara didn't touch it. She just kept working, her focus absolute. She was building her wall, one piece of paper at a time. The shift was almost over. She just had to make it a few more hours. Then the sirens started. Not one, but a chorus of them, growing louder, closer, converging on the hospital with a frantic urgency. This was different. This wasn't a single ambulance run. This was a mass casualty event. The relative calm of the ER shattered. Doctors and nurses began to move with purpose, their faces grim. The overhead speaker crackled to life. "Code triage. All available staff to the emergency bay. Code triage." Alara's stomach tightened, a knot of pure, cold dread. Code triage meant chaos. It meant noise, blood, and screaming. It was everything she had tried to escape. She stood up slowly, her body reluctant. But she was a nurse. She had a duty. She took a deep breath, tucked the stray hairs back behind her ear, and walked toward the storm. The ambulance bay was a scene of controlled pandemonium. A multi-car pileup on the interstate, the paramedics shouted over the noise. Mangled vehicles, explosions, a dozen victims. The first gurneys were already rolling in, each a new crisis, a new demand for immediate attention. Alara felt a familiar, unwelcome surge of adrenaline. Her training, the old training, tried to surface, cataloging injuries, prioritizing treatments, seeing the whole battlefield. She ruthlessly shoved it down. That wasn't her job anymore. Her job was to follow orders. "Vance, get over here. This one's a mess." It was Brenda, her face flushed. She pointed to a gurney being wheeled in by two exhausted paramedics. "Lacerations, possible head trauma. Get him into cubicle 3 and get his vitals." Alara nodded and moved to intercept the gurney. The man on it was unconscious, his face a mask of blood and grime. His clothes were torn and filthy, suggesting he might have been a vagrant caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. The paramedics rattled off their initial assessment. "John Doe, no ID. Found 30 yards from the main collision. Looks like he was thrown clear. Vitals are unstable but holding." As they transferred him to the bed in cubicle 3, Alara began her work. Her movements were clumsy, hesitant. She was playing her part. She fumbled with the blood pressure cuff, her hands seemingly unsure. But her eyes, shielded by her downcast gaze, were sharp. They missed nothing. She noted the grime under his fingernails, the worn-out soles of his boots. But she also noted the whipcord muscles beneath the dirt, the disciplined set of his jaw, even in unconsciousness. There was a coiled strength in this man that didn't fit the picture of a homeless drifter. She began cleaning the blood from his face and neck, her touch gentle. That's when she saw it. It was almost invisible, hidden in the shadow behind his right ear. Not a cut from the accident. It was a puncture mark. Tiny, precise, and already half-healed. It looked like a bee sting, if a bee used a weaponized microscopic needle. A cold shiver, completely unrelated to the air-conditioned chill of the room, traced its way down her spine. She had seen a wound like that before. Only once. In a place very far from here. The curtain to the cubicle was ripped open. Dr. Finch stood there, his face a thundercloud. He had taken charge of the entire ER, barking orders, his ego swelling with the scale of the disaster. He glanced at the patient, then at the monitor displaying his vitals. "What's the story here?" he demanded, not looking at Alara. "John Doe, ejected from the accident. Multiple lacerations, head trauma," she recited, her voice quiet. Finch did a cursory exam that lasted no more than 15 seconds. He shone a light in the patient's eyes, pressed a thumb into his sternum to check for a pain response, and listened to his chest for a single breath. It was a dismissive, arrogant assessment. Another drunk who wandered onto the highway. His blood alcohol is probably off the charts. His vitals are all over the place because he's in shock. He turned to leave. Stitch up the major lac on his forehead, give him a fluid drip, and park him in the hall. We need this cubicle for someone who actually matters. As soon as he's stable enough, he gets transferred to county. I'm not wasting our resources on him. The order was clear. It was also a death sentence. Alara's breath caught in her throat. She watched Finch stride away, his back ramrod straight. The man on the bed wasn't drunk. The signs were wrong. The intermittent, almost imperceptible tremor in his left pinky finger. The slight anisocoria, the unequal size of his pupils, that Finch had missed in his hasty check. The specific rhythm of his heart on the monitor, a subtle arrhythmia that looked like shock, but wasn't. She knew what it was. Her mind, the part of her she kept locked away, was screaming it at her. Delayed action neurotoxin, an assassination tool. It mimicked the symptoms of trauma or intoxication, buying time for the agent to do its work. Standard treatments for shock, especially certain fluid replacements, would act as an accelerant. It would bind the toxin to his nervous system, making it irreversible. Finch's orders would kill him within the hour. Her past and present collided with the force of a tectonic shift. For years, she had been Mouse. Quiet, compliant, invisible. It was safe. It was atonement. But the man on the gurney, this John Doe, was a soldier. She didn't know how she knew, but she did. It was in his bearing, in the calluses on his hands, in the very air of disciplined violence that clung to him even now. And a soldier did not leave another soldier to die. Not ever. She had a choice. Obey the chief of surgery, the god of this hospital, and let this man die. Or break every rule she had been hiding behind. She took a shaky breath and walked out of the cubicle. She found Finch directing two other nurses. "Dr. Finch," she said, her voice trembling slightly. He turned, his expression one of pure annoyance. "What is it now, Vance? Can't you even handle a simple fluid drip?" "It's the John Doe in 3, she said, forcing herself to meet his eyes. "I think you might have missed something. I think it's more than just shock. His pupils are—" Finch cut her off with a wave of his hand. "Nurse, are you seriously attempting to question my diagnosis? You, who can barely manage to carry a tray across a room. I am the chief of surgery at one of the top hospitals in the country. You are a barely competent floor nurse. Know your place." His voice was laced with contempt. "Now, do as you were told. Prep him for transfer. That's a direct order." He turned his back on her, a final, absolute dismissal. The conversation was over. Alara stood frozen for a moment. A direct order. He had drawn a line in the sand. She looked back toward cubicle 3. She could see the man's hand, the one with the slight tremor. Time was running out. Something inside her, something she had thought long dead, finally broke free of its cage. It was a cold, quiet rage, It burned away the fear. It burned away the shame. It burned away the mouse. She turned and walked back into the cubicle. Her movements were different now. There was no hesitation, no clumsiness. Every action was fluid, precise, and economical. She pulled the curtain shut and, for good measure, wedged a chair under the handle. It wouldn't hold for long, but she only needed minutes. She ignored the standard equipment in the room. She knew what she needed wasn't there. She strode to a locked supply closet at the back of the ER, a room reserved for specialized pharmacological agents. The keypad glowed. She entered a 7-digit code. An old code. A military code. One she had been ordered to memorize years ago and never forget. The lock clicked open. Inside, she found what she was looking for. A small refrigerated box containing vials of a specific chelating agent. Prussian blue derivative with a synthetic enhancement. It was designed for one purpose: to bind with and neutralize a very specific family of metallic alkaloid neurotoxins. It was incredibly rare in a civilian hospital. Most doctors had never even heard of it. But Metropolitan General had a contract with the Department of Defense, a quiet agreement to stock certain contingency medications. Ilara knew because she had helped write the protocol for their storage. She drew a precise dose into a syringe. Back in the cubicle, she didn't hesitate. She swabbed the man's arm and slid the needle into his vein, beginning a slow, careful IV push. This was the most dangerous part. Administered too quickly, the antidote itself could cause cardiac arrest. She watched the monitor, her eyes tracking his heart rate, her hand on the plunger as steady as a rock. The tremor in his hand began to subside. The arrhythmia on the monitor smoothed out, becoming a steady, strong rhythm. His pupils, when she checked them, were already starting to return to equal size. She had done it. She had pulled him back from the brink. A loud bang on the door made her jump. "Vance, what is the meaning of this? Open this door!" It was Finch. He had come back. He rattled the handle, then threw his shoulder against the door. The chair scraped against the floor. Ilara pulled the syringe from the patient's arm just as the door burst open. Finch stood there, his face purple with rage. His eyes went from the barricaded door to her, to the syringe in her hand. "What have you done?" he hissed. He snatched the empty syringe from her grasp and looked at it. He didn't recognize the drug, but he recognized the act of supreme insubordination. "You administered an unauthorized medication to my patient after I gave you a direct order." "You were going to kill him," Ilara said. Her voice was not a whisper now. It was calm, level, and cold. The sound of it seemed to shock him more than anything else. He stared at her as if seeing her for the first time. The timid, clumsy mouse was gone. In her place was a woman with eyes like chips of ice. It only enraged him further. "I am this hospital," he roared, his voice finally breaking into a full-throated shout that drew the attention of the entire ER. "I am the authority here, and you are nothing." He pointed a trembling finger at the door. "You are fired, Vance. You are fired." "Security!" he bellowed. "Get this incompetent menace out of my hospital. I want her license revoked. I want her blacklisted from every medical facility in this state. Get her out of my sight. Now!" 2 security guards, their faces grim and apologetic, appeared at his side. They looked at Ilara, then at Finch. His word was law. One of them gently took her arm. "Ma'am, you have to come with us." Ilara didn't resist. She gave one last look at the patient on the bed. He was stable. He would live. That was all that mattered. She allowed the guards to lead her from the cubicle. She walked with her head held high, her back straight. She passed Chloe, who was staring, her mouth open in shock. She passed Brenda, who couldn't meet her eyes. She passed all the doctors and nurses who had watched her humiliation earlier. Now they watched her expulsion, their faces a mixture of awe and fear. She was escorted through the emergency room, out the main doors, and deposited unceremoniously on the pavement outside. The automatic doors slid shut behind her, sealing her off from the world she had tried so hard to belong to. The rain had started, a cold, miserable drizzle that soaked her thin scrubs in seconds. She had been fired, humiliated, ejected. She had nothing. And yet, for the first time in years, she felt free. The walk to her apartment was a blur of wet pavement and blurred city lights. The rain plastered her scrubs to her skin, the chill seeping deep into her bones. She didn't have a jacket. She didn't have her purse, her keys, or her phone. Security had taken her badge and marched her out so quickly that she had left everything in her locker. She was locked out of her job, and soon she would be locked out of her home. The absurdity of it was almost laughable. She had saved a man's life, and this was her reward. She stood across the street from her small, run-down apartment building, shivering in the downpour. The adrenaline had faded, leaving behind a profound, bone-deep weariness. What now? Where did she go from here? The life she had so carefully constructed, the quiet, gray existence of Nurse Vance, had been demolished in a single act of defiance. The past she had run from was now the only thing she had left. That's when the sound began. A low, rhythmic thumping that grew steadily louder, cutting through the drumming of the rain. It wasn't the familiar sound of city traffic. It was deeper, more powerful. She looked up, squinting through the sheets of water. 2 points of light descended from the bruised purple sky, resolving into the landing lights of a helicopter. No, 2 helicopters. They were large, black, and utterly alien against the backdrop of civilian life. They weren't news choppers or medical transports. They were military. And they were not heading for the hospital helipad. With a deafening roar of rotors and a whirlwind of displaced rain, one of them landed directly in the middle of the street, not a block from where she stood. Cars screeched to a halt, their horns blaring in confusion and anger. The second helicopter hovered overhead, its searchlight cutting a brilliant white cone through the gloom. Doors slid open on the landed aircraft before its skids had even fully settled. Figures clad in black tactical gear, armed with assault rifles, poured out. They moved with a terrifying fluid efficiency, establishing a perimeter, shutting down the street as if they owned it. Out of the same chaos, a convoy of black SUVs with tinted windows came screaming around the corner, ignoring traffic laws. They screeched to a halt in front of the hospital's main entrance. More armed soldiers emerged, fanning out, their weapons held at a low ready. They weren't assaulting the hospital. They were securing it. Alara watched, mesmerized and horrified. This was an invasion. A surgical, professional, military takeover. But why? What were they looking for? They weren't looking for a terrorist. They weren't looking for a bomb. Her blood ran cold. They were looking for him. The John Doe, Captain Ryder. The main doors of the ER burst open, and a man strode out, flanked by 2 of the largest soldiers Alara had ever seen. He was tall, silver-haired, and wore the immaculate uniform of a high-ranking naval officer. Stars glittered on his collar. An admiral. He moved with an air of absolute, unquestionable authority that made Dr. Finch's petty tyranny seem like a child's tantrum. He ignored the gawking civilians and the panicking hospital staff. His eyes swept the chaotic scene with a cold, analytical gaze. He approached the first person he saw, a terrified-looking administrator, clutching a clipboard. The Admiral didn't raise his voice, but his words cut through the noise like tempered steel. I am Admiral Marcus Thorne, United States Navy. This facility is now under temporary military jurisdiction. I am looking for a nurse. We don't have her name, just a code name. We are looking for the Angel. The administrator stared at him, dumbfounded. Angel? We don't have anyone by that name. Thorne's jaw tightened. He had expected this. She would have treated a John Doe patient brought in from the interstate collision approximately 2 hours ago. Find her. Now. Meanwhile, Alara was still frozen across the street, a ghost watching a scene from her old life unfold. They were looking for her. The code name was a ghost from her past, a name whispered in field hospitals and dusty medevac choppers, a name she thought she had left behind in the sand and the blood. A black SUV detached from the main convoy and drove slowly down the street, its headlights sweeping the sidewalk. It pulled to a stop directly in front of her. The passenger side window slid down with a quiet hum. Inside, a soldier in full combat gear looked out at her. His eyes, seen through the sight of his rifle, widened slightly. He spoke into his radio. Sir, I think we have her. The back door of the SUV opened. Ma'am, a voice called out, calm and respectful. We've been looking for you. Admiral Thorne would like to speak with you." Numbly, she moved toward the vehicle. The soldier held the door for her as she slid inside. The interior was warm and dry, a stark contrast to the cold rain. Sitting across from her was Admiral Thorne himself. He had left the chaos at the hospital entrance and somehow appeared here. His face was etched with concern, but his eyes held a flicker of profound relief. He knew her. "Alara," he said, his voice softer now. "It's been too long." She could only nod, the name a shock after so many years of being Vance. "Captain Alex Ryder was compromised," Thorne continued, getting straight to the point. "He activated his deep cover emergency beacon just before he lost consciousness. Your name and a code phrase were his designated failsafe. He knew if anyone could handle a G7 neurotoxin without the proper intel, it was you. So the John Doe had a name, Captain Alex Ryder, and he knew her, or knew of her. The Angel of the 75th, a flight medic with a reputation for pulling miracles out of thin air in the worst places on Earth. A life she had fled after one mission went horribly wrong, leaving her with a scar on her temple and a wound in her soul. I was fired," she heard herself say, the words sounding hollow and absurd. Thorne's expression darkened. "I am aware. I just had a very enlightening conversation with your former chief of surgery." He leaned forward. "The man is an arrogant fool. But that is a problem for another time. Right now, Captain Ryder needs you. The antidote you administered saved his life, but it also tripped a wire. The people who dosed him now know he's alive and that their weapon failed. They will be coming for him." He paused, his gaze intense. "I need you back in there. You're the mission expert now. You are in charge of his care, completely. No one will question you. No one will stand in your way. I will make sure of it." He handed her a dry military jacket. It was warm and heavy, a mantle of responsibility. She slipped it on over her soaked scrubs. It felt more natural than the nurse's uniform ever had. "Let's go," Thorne said, his voice hardening again. "It's time to reintroduce you to your colleagues." The walk back into the hospital was a world away from her walk of shame just an hour earlier. This time, she wasn't being led out by guards. She was flanked by Admiral Thorne and two of his elite soldiers, their weapons a clear and present statement of her new authority. The rain had stopped. The world seemed to be holding its breath. They entered the ER. The scene was frozen. Doctors, nurses, and patients stared as their procession moved through the room. It was like watching a shark swim through a school of minnows. They parted before them, their eyes wide with disbelief, focusing on the small, drenched woman in the oversized military jacket. The mouse was back, and she had brought wolves with her. They found Dr. Finch near the nurses' station, trying to reassert his authority over Thorne's soldiers. He was blustering, his face red, his voice shaking with fury. "I am the chief of surgery. You have no jurisdiction here. I demand you and your men leave at once." "I don't believe we've been properly introduced," Thorne said, his voice dangerously calm. He stopped directly in front of Finch, forcing the man to crane his neck to look up at him. "I am Admiral Thorne, and you, I believe, are the man who just fired the most valuable medical asset on this continent." Finch's eyes darted to Alara, standing beside the Admiral. A flicker of confusion, then dawning horror crossed his face. He couldn't connect the two. The clumsy nurse and this figure of importance. "Her?" Finch sputtered, pointing a trembling finger. "That's Nurse Vance. She's incompetent, a menace. She violated every protocol, administered an unknown substance." "The unknown substance she administered," Thorne cut in, his voice dropping to an icy whisper, "is a classified counteragent for a chemical weapon. The incompetent nurse you fired is, in fact, former Air Force pararescue flight medic Alara Vance, recipient of the Distinguished Flying Cross and 2 Silver Stars for her actions under fire. She has more real-world trauma experience in one of her little fingers than you have in your entire comfortable career. The only reason my captain is still alive is because of her." A collective gasp went through the ER. Chloe stared, her hands covering her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. Brenda sagged against a counter, her face pale with shock and regret. Thorne took a step closer to the now trembling surgeon. "You made a medical decision based on arrogance and prejudice. You gave an order that would have resulted in the death of a United States military officer. You then attempted to destroy the career of the one person who could save him. He leaned in, his voice for Finch's ears only, but the menace was palpable to everyone. You are a disgrace to your profession, and you are a threat to my mission. He straightened up, his voice ringing out for all to hear. As of this moment, Dr. Finch, you are relieved of all duties pertaining to the patient in Cubicle 3. In fact, you are relieved of all duties, period. You will not come near him. You will not access his chart. You will not speak to any member of the staff regarding his care. Nurse Vance is in command. She is the final authority. This hospital and its resources are at her disposal. Any person who questions her, hinders her, or fails to comply with her instructions will answer directly to me. Is that understood? Finch could only stare, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on a dock. His power, his authority, his entire world had been dismantled in front of his staff in less than 2 minutes. Thorne didn't wait for an answer. He turned to Alara, his expression softening. "Commander," he said, deliberately using a title of respect. "Your patient is waiting." Alara nodded. She brushed past the stunned Dr. Finch without a second glance and walked toward Cubicle 3, the sea of onlookers parting before her. She was no longer a ghost. She was the storm. Inside the cubicle, 2 of Thorne's men stood guard. Captain Ryder was still unconscious, but his vitals on the monitor were strong and steady. Alara picked up his chart. Finch's dismissive, arrogant notes were scrawled across the top. Below them, Alara took a pen and drew a single, sharp line. Then she began to write. Her handwriting was no longer the cramped, hesitant script of Mouse. It was clear, concise, and authoritative. She was writing orders now. Thorne entered the cubicle behind her. "What's his status, Commander?" "The antidote is working," she said, not looking up from the chart. "It's neutralized the primary agent, but the toxin has a secondary component, a biological marker. Now that the primary agent has been neutralized, the marker will begin to degrade. When it does, it sends a signal, a very faint, very specific radio frequency burst. It's a dead man's switch in reverse. It tells whoever deployed it that their target is not dead and that an intervention has occurred." Thorne's face was grim. "So you didn't just save him. You lit a beacon for the enemy." "It was the only choice," Alara stated flatly. "The signal is a problem we can solve. Death is not." She looked at the Admiral. "They know he's here, and they know someone here knows what they're using. They will not let that stand. They will come to finish the job and to eliminate any witnesses." "My men have secured the floor," Thorne said. "No one comes in or out without my authorization." Alara shook her head. "That's not enough. They won't come through the front door with guns blazing. Not at first. They'll be subtle. A cleaner, a food service worker, maybe even a fake patient. This hospital is a civilian facility. It's too porous. It's a death trap." As if on cue, a commotion erupted outside the cubicle. Shouting, followed by a dull thud and the clatter of a weapon on the floor. One of Thorne's soldiers appeared at the curtain, his face tense. "Sir, we have a situation. A janitor with a mop bucket tried to get past us. Said he was ordered to clean the room." "And?" Thorne asked. "He had a silenced pistol hidden under the rags in his bucket," the soldier reported. "He went for it when we challenged him. He's been neutralized." Alara and Thorne exchanged a look. Her prediction had come true in less than 5 minutes. "That's it," Thorne declared. "We're moving him. Now." He got on his radio, his voice sharp with command. "Initiate extraction protocol, phase gamma. I want wheels up in 10 minutes. And get me a location, something off-grid, defensible, with the medical facilities she needs." While Thorne coordinated the escape, Alara turned her attention back to Ryder. They had to move him, and moving a critically ill patient was a risk. She prepared a go-bag of medications, IV lines, and portable monitoring equipment. Her hands flew, grabbing what she needed with an instinct born of 1,000 frantic evacuations under fire. Then she noticed Finch. The disgraced doctor was standing 20 feet away, near a bank of phones, his back to them. He was trying to look casual, but his posture was rigid with fury and humiliation. He was holding his phone to his ear, his voice a low, urgent murmur. He thought no one was watching, but Alara was. She saw him end the call and quickly pocket the phone, his eyes darting around nervously. He had been a fool, but now he was something more dangerous. He was a compromised asset. "Admiral," she said quietly, nodding in Finch's direction. "We have another problem." Thorne followed her gaze. His eyes narrowed. "The good doctor is making a phone call after being explicitly ordered to stand down." He spoke into his radio again. "Two of you, secure Dr. Finch, non-violently if possible. Confiscate his phone. I want to know who he was talking to." Two soldiers peeled away from their posts and moved toward Finch. The doctor saw them coming. Panic flared in his eyes. He turned to run, but he was a surgeon, not a sprinter. They had him in seconds, wrestling his phone from his hand as he shrieked about his rights. "Too late," Alara said. "Whatever damage he could do, he's already done it." "Then we need to be faster," Thorne replied. "Let's go." The evacuation was a masterclass in controlled chaos. Thorne's men created a diversion at the main entrance, drawing the attention of the hospital staff and the gathering media. While all eyes were on the front, Alara, Thorne, and a small team of soldiers wheeled Captain Ryder's gurney down a service corridor toward a back alley loading dock. They moved quickly and silently through the hospital's concrete guts. They burst out into the cool night air. The helicopter that had been hovering overhead was now waiting for them, its rotors spinning slowly. The noise was immense. The soldiers quickly loaded the gurney aboard. Alara climbed in after it, never taking her eyes off her patient. Thorne was the last one in. "Go, go, go!" he yelled at the pilot. The helicopter leaped into the air with a gut-wrenching lurch, banking hard over the city. Below, the hospital shrank, a tiny island of light in the vast darkness. Alara looked down at the life she was leaving behind for the second time. The life of the mouse was over. The life of the angel had begun again. They flew for over an hour, heading north, away from the city lights and into the dark, jagged teeth of the mountains. The cabin was loud and vibrated with the power of the engines. Alara worked by the dim red glow of the interior lights, constantly checking Ryder's vitals, adjusting his IV drip, ensuring the transfer wasn't putting too much strain on his recovering system. He remained unconscious, a still point in the whirlwind of activity around him. Thorne sat across from her, his face illuminated by the glow of a tablet. He was reviewing the data from Finch's phone. His expression grew darker with every swipe of his finger. "It's worse than we thought," he said, his voice grim over the roar of the rotors. "Finch wasn't just arrogant. He's corrupt. He has massive gambling debts. He's been selling access to the hospital's network for months. Patient data, research, security protocols. His contact is a shell corporation, a front for a private military contractor called Aegis Valor." Alara's head snapped up. "Aegis Valor? They're a mercenary group. Black Ops for hire. They were implicated in the Odessa incident 2 years ago." "The very same," Thorne confirmed. "And according to these texts, Finch just sold them our location. Or rather, he sold them Captain Ryder. He told them an unstable nurse and a military unit had taken him. He gave them everything." "They're the ones who dosed him," Alara concluded. "Ryder must have had intelligence on them. This isn't just about silencing a target anymore. It's about retrieving whatever information he has and eliminating everyone who knows about it." "Which puts you at the top of their list," Thorne said, his eyes filled with a grim respect. The helicopter began to descend. Below them, nestled in a small wooded valley, was a single point of light. It was a large, modern cabin, but Alara could see the telltale signs of reinforcement. Steel shutters over the windows, a reinforced concrete foundation, and a perimeter fence that was likely electrified. It was a safe house. They landed in a clearing a few hundred yards from the cabin. The team disembarked quickly, moving Ryder's gurney into the house. It was warm inside, and surprisingly well equipped. One of the main rooms had been converted into a fully functional medical bay, complete with monitors, ventilators, and a crash cart. They transferred Ryder to a proper bed. Alara immediately went to work, hooking him up to the more advanced systems, drawing blood for a new panel of tests. She needed to know how the secondary marker was degrading. She needed to know how much time they had. Thorne posted his men around the perimeter. The small team of 10 soldiers was all that stood between them and a well-armed mercenary force. "They'll come," Thorne said, standing at the window, peering out into the impenetrable darkness of the forest. "It's just a matter of when." Hours passed. The only sounds were the hum of the medical equipment and the crackle of the radio. Alara worked tirelessly, analyzing Ryder's blood work on a portable centrifuge and microscope. The news wasn't good. The degradation of the marker was accelerating. "The signal burst will happen in the next 90 minutes, she announced to the room. "When it does, it'll be like a flare in the dark. If they're anywhere within 100 miles, they'll pinpoint our exact location." "They're already on their way," Thorne said grimly. "Finch gave them the general area. They've been hunting. The signal will just make it easier for them to knock on the door." Just then, Captain Ryder stirred. His eyelids fluttered. He let out a low groan. Alara was at his side in an instant. "Captain, can you hear me?" His eyes opened. They were blue, and for a moment, clouded with confusion. They focused on her face. A flicker of recognition. "Angel?" he rasped, his voice rough. "I'm here," she said softly. "You're safe." "Aegis," he whispered. "They have the formula. The nerve agent. It's not the weapon. It's a delivery system for something worse." He struggled to speak, his breath catching. "Project Chimera. In my boot. Drive." He lapsed back into unconsciousness. Alara looked at Thorne. Project Chimera. She immediately went to Ryder's right boot. Tucked into a hidden slit in the leather lining was a tiny, encrypted data drive. She held it up. This was it. This was what he had almost died for. This was what Aegis Valor was coming to retrieve. A sudden burst of static from the radio, then a soldier's voice, tense and urgent. "Contact! Multiple hostiles approaching from the north tree line. They're here!" The siege began without warning. The first sign was a series of soft thuds as high-velocity rounds slammed into the cabin's reinforced walls. The steel shutters automatically slammed down over the windows, plunging the room into darkness, save for the emergency lights and the glow of the medical monitors. Thorne was already shouting orders. "Return fire! Hold the perimeter! Don't let them get close!" The cabin erupted with the deafening chatter of automatic weapons fire as Thorne's men answered the attack. The air filled with the smell of cordite. Alara didn't flinch. She threw herself over Ryder's body, protecting him from any stray rounds that might penetrate the walls. This was her battlefield now. The patient was the objective. Everything else was secondary. The firefight was brutal and one-sided. Aegis Valor had come in force, with superior numbers and heavy weapons. The crackle of the radio told a grim story. "Man down at Post 3. They're flanking us on the west. We're taking heavy fire." A grenade exploded near the front of the cabin, the concussion shaking the entire structure. The lights flickered and died, leaving them in near total darkness. The medical monitors switched to battery backup, their eerie green glow casting long, dancing shadows. "They've cut the power," Thorne yelled. "They're preparing to breach." One of his soldiers, a young man with a nasty shrapnel wound in his leg, stumbled back into the medical bay. "Sir, they're too many. We can't hold them." Alara was on him in a second, pushing him down onto the floor. "Stay still," she commanded, her voice cutting through his panic. Her hands moved with practiced speed, tearing open a field dressing, locating the bleeder, and applying a tourniquet high on his thigh. She worked by the faint glow of the monitors, her touch sure and steady even as bullets hammered against the walls outside. "Fall back to the house," Thorne ordered into his radio. "Collapse the perimeter. Defend the main structure." The surviving soldiers retreated inside, barring the reinforced doors just as the mercenaries reached the cabin. Now they were trapped. 4 soldiers, Admiral Thorne, Alara, and her unconscious patient, surrounded by a private army. The enemy began trying to breach the doors, using a battering ram. Each impact was a body blow to the house. Thump! 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 "They're coming through!" a soldier yelled. Thorne took up a position beside the main door, his sidearm drawn. "This is our last stand," he said, his voice grim but resolute. "Make them pay for every inch." Alara finished securing the wounded soldier's leg. She looked at the firefight, at the grim faces of the men preparing to die. Then she looked at Ryder, vulnerable on the bed. Her mission was to protect him, and that mission was about to fail. The main door splintered, then burst inward. Mercenaries in black armor poured into the cabin, their weapons spitting fire. Thorne and his men returned fire, a desperate final fusillade. 2 of the mercenaries went down, but one of Thorne's soldiers fell, a spray of red against the wall. The lead mercenary, a mountain of a man with a skull painted on his helmet, advanced into the room, firing methodically. He shot the last of Thorne's soldiers, then turned his weapon on the Admiral. Thorne got a shot off, hitting the man in the chest, but his body armor held. The mercenary returned fire, and Thorne cried out, clutching his shoulders. He fell back against the wall, his pistol clattering to the floor. It was over. The mercenary commander strode into the medical bay, his rifle sweeping the room. His eyes landed on Ryder in the bed, then on Alara standing beside him. "Well, well," the commander's voice crackled through his helmet speaker. "The package and the rogue medic. My employer will be very pleased." He raised his rifle, aiming it at Ryder's head. "Hand over the drive, and I'll make this quick for you." Alara didn't move. Her face was a calm, cold mask. In the chaos of the breach, she had moved. Unseen, unnoticed. When Admiral Thorne had fallen, his sidearm had slid across the floor, coming to rest in the shadows beneath the medical bed. Her hand had slipped down and retrieved it. It was heavy and solid in her grasp, a familiar weight. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice steady. The commander laughed. "Don't play dumb. It doesn't suit you." He took a step closer. "Last chance." As he moved, his eyes were fixed on her face. He never saw her hand come up from behind the bed. He never saw the pistol. He only heard the sound. Crack. Crack. 2 shots, fired so close together they sounded like one. A perfect double tap. Not at his armored chest, at his head. The first round starred the reinforced visor of his helmet. The second punched through the weakened spot, right between his eyes. The skull-faced commander stood frozen for a second, a look of utter surprise on his face. Then he crumpled to the floor like a puppet with its strings cut. The other mercenaries, stunned by the sudden fall of their leader, hesitated for a fatal second. In that second, a new sound joined the fray. The unmistakable whoomp, whoomp, whoomp of approaching helicopters. Not one or two, a whole squadron. Backup had arrived. Floodlights bathed the cabin in brilliant white light. A voice boomed from a loudspeaker. "This is the United States Marine Corps. Drop your weapons. You are surrounded." The remaining Aegis mercenaries, their leader dead and their escape cut off, threw down their rifles and raised their hands in surrender. The siege was broken. Alara stood over the body of the mercenary commander, the pistol still smoking in her hand. She was breathing heavily, the adrenaline finally hitting her. She had just taken a life to save another. The ghost of the angel was no longer a ghost. She was flesh and blood and fury, and she was done hiding. The days that followed were a whirlwind of debriefings and secured facilities. Captain Ryder, conscious and recovering, confirmed everything. The data drive contained irrefutable proof that Aegis Valor, under contract from a shadowy international syndicate, had developed Project Chimera, a biological agent that could be delivered by the neurotoxin, which would then erase any trace of itself, making the deaths look like accidents or natural causes. Ryder's mission had been to secure the proof. Alara's intervention had saved not only him, but the entire investigation. The final act, however, was yet to be played. 2 days after the siege, Dr. Alistair Finch stood at a podium in the main lobby of Metropolitan General Hospital. He had called a press conference. Flanked by his expensive lawyers, he looked smug and confident. He had been cleared of any criminal wrongdoing by a judge his family played golf with, and now he was on the offensive. "The events of the past few days have been trying," he began, his voice smooth and reasonable. "Our hospital, a place of healing, was invaded by an overzealous military force and a deranged, unstable nurse who endangered countless lives." He painted a picture of himself as the sole voice of reason, a dedicated doctor trying to protect his patients from a rogue element. This nurse, Alara Vance, has a history of insubordination. She was fired for just cause. Her subsequent actions, in concert with a reckless military commander, put a patient's life at grave risk and brought violence to our doorstep. I am calling for a full investigation into this gross overreach of military authority and for the permanent revocation of Miss Vance's nursing license. He was brilliant. He was plausible. He was winning. The reporters scribbled furiously, eating up the narrative of the heroic doctor versus the crazed nurse and the jackbooted military. "Are there any questions?" Finch asked, a triumphant smirk playing on his lips. "I have one. The voice came from the back of the lobby. The crowd of reporters parted. Admiral Thorne strode through them, his uniform immaculate, his face like stone. Beside him, in a wheelchair pushed by a Marine, was Captain Alex Ryder, looking sharp and resolute in his own dress uniform. And walking beside them, no longer in scrubs or a borrowed jacket, but in a simple, elegant black dress, was Alara Vance. Her head was high, her gaze was clear, and she wasn't hiding her scar anymore. It was part of her. They came to a stop in front of the podium. Finch's face went pale. His confident smirk vanished, replaced by a look of pure animal panic. Thorne ignored him and addressed the reporters. "My name is Admiral Marcus Thorne. I am the commander who Dr. Finch has accused of reckless behavior. This is Captain Alex Ryder, the patient whose life he claims was endangered. And this is Alara Vance, the hero he is attempting to crucify." He gestured to a large screen on the wall behind the podium. Dr. Finch has painted a compelling picture. Unfortunately for him, it's a complete fabrication. An audio file began to play over the lobby's speaker system. It was Finch's voice, tinny and frantic, from the call he made in the ER. "Yes, it's him, the asset. A military team is here, and some nurses with them. You have to get him. I don't care what it costs. Just handle it." The recording ended, leaving a stunned silence. Thorne's voice filled the void. That was Dr. Finch, not trying to protect a patient, but selling him out to the very mercenaries who tried to kill him. Mercenaries he was in business with. Financial records flashed on the screen. Bank transfers, offshore accounts, a direct link between Finch and Aegis Valor. Then, security footage. The janitor assassin entering the ER Finch looking the other way. "Dr. Finch did not protect this hospital," Thorne boomed, his voice ringing with righteous fury. "He sold it. He did not try to save Captain Ryder. He tried to have him murdered. And he did not fire Alara Vance for incompetence. He fired her because her competence exposed his corruption." Finch began to scream. "Lies! All lies! Doctored tapes! Forged documents! This is a military conspiracy!" But no one was listening to him. All eyes were on Alara as she stepped forward. She didn't speak to the press. She spoke to the hospital staff gathered at the edges of the crowd, to Chloe, who was openly weeping with joy, to Brenda, who looked at her with an expression of profound shame. "I was a good nurse," Alara said, her voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the room. "I tried to do my job, but I was taught that the patient comes first. Always. Even if it costs you everything." As she finished speaking, two uniformed city police officers moved through the crowd. They walked past Thorne, past Ryder, past Alara, and stopped on either side of the blubbering Dr. Finch. "Alistair Finch," one of the officers said, "you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, accessory to terrorism, and multiple violations of federal law." Finch shrieked, a raw, pathetic sound of a cornered animal. He struggled as they pulled his arms behind his back and snapped handcuffs onto his wrists. "You can't do this to me! I am the chief of surgery!" he wailed as they dragged him away, a broken, disgraced man whose world had crumbled to dust. The lobby was silent for a moment, and then it erupted in applause. It started with Chloe, then some of the other nurses, and soon the entire room was clapping. For Alara. The hospital board members, who had been standing in the back, rushed forward, apologizing, promising her job back, a promotion, anything. Alara just shook her head, a small, sad smile on her face. That life was over. Admiral Thorne stepped to the podium one last time. Alara Vance is a national hero. Her actions saved not only Captain Ryder, but prevented a weapon of unimaginable destructive power from being unleashed. Her country, and I, owe her a debt that can never truly be repaid. He turned to face her. "But we can try." His voice softened, but it was still a public declaration. The Department of Defense has authorized the creation of a new unit, a rapid response special operations medical team, tasked with handling exactly these kinds of crises. It needs a commander, someone with tactical experience, unparalleled medical skill, and the courage to do what's right, no matter the cost. He paused. "The position is yours, if you want it, Commander Vance. No more hiding. We need you, the real you." Alara looked at Thorne, at the rows of supportive faces, at Captain Ryder, who was watching her with a look of pure admiration. The choice was so simple. It had always been simple. She had just been too afraid to make it. "I accept," she said. Later that day, Alara Vance walked out of Metropolitan General Hospital for the final time. She carried no box of belongings, no bitter memories. She walked with her shoulders back, her gaze fixed on the future. Captain Ryder, now on crutches, was beside her. "So," he said, a grin playing on his lips. "Where to now, Commander?" She looked ahead, toward a black government car waiting at the curb to take her to her new life. She reached up and touched the scar on her temple. It wasn't a mark of shame anymore. It was a medal, a reminder of who she was, who she had been, and who she was about to become. "Forward, Captain," she said, a real smile finally reaching her eyes. "Always forward." We really hope you enjoyed this educational piece of content, and hope that you could understand the moral lessons behind it. The story of Alara Vance teaches us a powerful lesson about integrity and the courage to do what is right, even in the face of overwhelming pressure and personal cost. It reminds us that true strength is not found in titles or authority, but in character and conviction. Dr. Finch's arrogance and cruelty were ultimately his undoing, proving that wrongdoing, no matter how well hidden, will eventually come to light. Alara's story is an inspirational reminder that we should never judge a book by its cover, as hidden depths of strength and heroism can be found in the most unexpected people. Doing the right thing, staying true to one's principles, and protecting others are the highest callings, and they always pay off in the end. What would you have done if you were in Alara's shoes? Would you have defied a direct order from your boss to save a stranger's life, even if it meant losing your job? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, please smash that like button, and make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Have a nice rest of your day.